O God, may your spirit and guidance be in us as we work for the benefit of all our people, for peace and justice in our land, and for the constant recognition of the dignity and aspirations of those whom we serve. Amen.
Members, the Government of Canada has designated today, March 11th, 2021, as a National Day of Observance to commemorate the people who lost their lives and the significant impacts we have all felt because of COVID-19. The Northwest Territories has been spared much of the loss experienced across Canada. But we have not been spared from the negative effects of the virus. We have all made sacrifices to keep the Northwest Territories safe from COVID-19. Today, we lower our flags in honor of those we have lost and the sacrifices we have all made in our common fight against COVID-19. I ask members to join me in a moment of silence to mark those who have lost their lives to COVID-19. Thank you. Thank you, members. Members, it was on this day in 1975 that the Northwest Territories Legislative Assembly became the first in Canada to have a majority of First Nations representatives elected. Merci. Minister statements. Minister statements. Minister responsible for municipal and community affairs.
Mr. Speaker, Northwest Territories residents are no strangers to emergency events. Every year we are faced with threats such as forest fires and floods, to name a couple. Over the past 10 years alone, we have seen 21 emergency events that have resulted in the activation of community and territorial emergency plans. And in some cases, those events led to community evacuations. These events have included wildfires, floods, severe weather, prolonged power outages, and fuel shortages. The approach to emergency management in the Northwest Territories relies on participation from everybody, individuals, families, and to all levels of government. We are all in this together. Individuals and families have a responsibility to plan and prepare for the risk most relevant to them, to ensure their safety and the protection of their property. Communities are responsible for the development and implementation of emergency plans to reasonably protect the general public and minimize property damage and loss during emergencies. The Government of the Northwest Territories is responsible for planning and responding to territorial emergencies and supporting communities when their capacity is exceeding during emergencies. Since March 2020, the Northwest Territories residents have been faced with a new threat unlike any we have ever experienced before, the COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic response is being led by Health and Social Services and is supported by COVID Secretariat and as well as Municipal and Community Affairs. MACA's primary focus during this event has included supporting the N.W.T's pandemic response, working with communities to ensuring planning and preparedness at the community level, and monitoring for any other emergency events. MACA works with all departments through the Emergency Management Organization and to provide needed support to communities. Mr. Speaker, one of the key success factors in the past emergencies have been the ability for our communities to plan and prepare, and when required, respond to protect and care for our residents. As we found ourselves in the COVID-19 pandemic, very few community plans included guidelines on how to respond to a threat. As a result, since early in the pandemic, MACA has been working with the communities to ensure there is a good understanding of the potential threat and their requirements to sustain essential services. Communities have been working very hard to ensure they have plans in place, identified potential gaps in services, and preparation for being made. Mr. Speaker, the true value of planning and preparedness is not realized until an emergency happens. The community of Fort Liard is an excellent example, and the first real test of a community emergency plan to direct impact of a pandemic. On January 16, 2021, when the first case of COVID was confirmed in Fort Liard, these emergency plans were implemented, which meant activating local officials. The Decho Regional Emergency Management Organization was also activated and deployed on site. Coordinators to Fort Liard daily to support the community governments who advise as there are limitations to capacity in some areas. Staff also provided support for daily meetings with community leaderships and ensured integration of EMO efforts with various people and groups. While community resources and capacity were impacted by incident, the community was able, with support from the Emergency Management Organization, to respond and ensure all essential services continued. These efforts also meant that those required to self-isolate had to receive groceries and other essential items. We want to commend the community for pulling together to ensure that all residents had their basic needs and support during this response. Mr. Speaker, planning for and responding to emergency events in an ongoing process and the COVID-19 pandemic is unpredictable. MACA will continue to work with communities to ensure community plans are adapted and adjusted as more is learned about COVID-19. As the risk to the environment and assessment evolves, as vaccine programs take effect, and as we learn from experiences like the response in Fort Liard. Mr. Speaker, COVID-19 has been a long and difficult road for everyone. The rollout of the vaccine in the Northwest Territories is being well received. It is important to note that the situation in the rest of Canada shows that we need to remain vigilant. I would like to remind everybody that it is critical that we all remain focused on protecting one another on behalf of Cabinet, and I would like to also thank all residents who continue to follow the advice and direction given by the Chief Public Health Officer and to ensure their own personal preparedness. Develop personal emergency plans, have emergency supplies on hand, and connect with friends and families, neighbors to support each other. A simple phone call to offer to drop off groceries and at the doorstep can make a huge difference for anybody that is feeling alone while they're self-isolating. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, once again, I would just like to thank the people of the Northwest Territories and the response and working with the government of the Northwest Territories. Must seat, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Minister statements. Minister statements. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Government of the Northwest Territories knows how important it is to enable seniors to age in place with dignity as loved and valued members of our communities. That's why the 19th Legislative Assembly has identified this as one of 22 priorities in the mandate of the Government of the Northwest Territories. We are taking a whole-of-government approach to create the conditions in which seniors will be able to stay at home as they age. Mr. Speaker, one way the Department of Health and Social Services is working to achieve this mandate priority is by implementing recommendations from the Home and Community Care Review. We want to support seniors to remain living independently with services such as nursing care, personal care like bathing and dressing, and home support for meals and laundry. While we focus on improving home and community care services, we know that not everyone's care needs can be met in the community, particularly those with complex conditions and those who need care throughout the day and night. For this reason, the department is also providing equitable access to high-quality, long-term care services to support seniors. Mr. Speaker, back in 2015, the N.W.T provided an estimate of how many long-term care beds we would need in future years. At that time, we had only 5 years of long-term care data, and we used a ratio-based model of people to population, people in need to population. Last summer, the department decided to update those numbers. Staff worked with the N.W.T Bureau of Statistics to redo the estimate of long-term care beds required over the next 14 years. Later today, I will be tabling the result, a report titled Projected Demand for Long-Term Care Beds in the N.W.T, and another called The Department's Response to Long-Term Care Bed Projections. The summary of the report tells us we will not require as many new beds as we thought in 2015. The N.W.T Bureau of Statistics used the most current and best practices to establish the demand for care. The Bureau used 10 years of N.W.T long-term care data for its modeling and provided the department with projections for 3 scenarios based on age and care needs. The projections for all 3 indicate the same thing. The number of beds needed has decreased. The Department of Health and Social Services has accepted one of these scenarios. We are confident that these projections are based on the best evidence available. These projections align with key findings about long-term care use in the N.W.T, such as our average age of admission into long-term care and the care levels individuals require upon admission. To make a long story short, we will need an additional 169 long-term care beds by 2034. This is a reduction from the 2015 bed projections that identify we would need 435 additional beds in that same time frame. These updated projections are based on a model that is aligned with best practices used by other jurisdictions. The N.W.T Bureau of Statistics used 10 years of the department's long-term care data and regional and territorial population projections to provide the new long-term care bed projections up to 2035. Our projections now tell us the N.W.T's long-term care bed use is 72 per 1,000 population age 70 or older, as compared to the 115 per 1,000 population age 70 and older used for the earlier projections. This is one of the biggest contributors to the adjustment in the 2020 bed projections. We have also added long-term care beds in Norman Wells and Betchico since the projections were done in 2015. The revised bed projections will not result in a reduction of services for seniors. We will use our home and community care resources more effectively. This means that seniors will receive the support they need in their home communities for as long as possible without going into long-term care. Long-term care is meant for seniors who require high levels of care and that can no longer be supported in their homes. Examples include medically complex diagnosis, a person who requires 24/7 care, and a person who is at high risk of injury to self or others. Seniors will be supported by the whole of government, which includes targeted investment in other areas, including additional seniors housing. Mr. Speaker, this is a dramatic change, and these new long-term care bed projections will require a shift in the department's current plans for capital spending in several N.W.T communities. The department plans to discuss these changes with stakeholders. We want to determine the best approach to provide an evidence-based continuum of services to meet the care needs of seniors, including home care, long-term care, and other innovative approaches like the paid family caregiver pilot. Through initial engagement with Indigenous governments and health and social services system leaders, we have confirmed the desire to have elders and their caregivers supported to remain living in their homes. The department will continue to work collaboratively to respond. Mr. Speaker, the Department of Health and Social Services is committed to enhancing home and community care services to more fully meet the care needs of seniors and elders so they can remain independent for as long as possible, and ensuring long-term care services are in place when their needs can no longer be met in their communities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Minister statements. Minister statements. Minister responsible for education, culture, and employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on September 1st, 2021, the minimum wage in the Northwest Territories will increase from $13.46 per hour to $15.20 per hour, making it the second highest minimum wage in Canada behind Nunavut. Since the last increase in 2018, the cost of living and the average hourly wage in the Northwest Territories has risen. This increase ensures that the minimum wage does not fall behind, brings our minimum to average wage ratio more in line with the rest of Canada, and makes us more competitive with our neighbouring jurisdictions. Mr. Speaker, the Government of the Northwest Territories is very aware of the ongoing impacts that the COVID-19 pandemic has had on employees and businesses. That is why this government has provided a number of supports since the onset of the pandemic, including the N.W.T. Wage Top-Up Program, which has been extended until August 31st, 2021, the extension of the Business Development and Investment Corporation working capital loans and deferred loan payments, financial supports for the arts and agricultural sectors, and the Support for Entrepreneurs and Economic Development Program, which was adapted to the realities of the pandemic. We also understand the importance of providing employers with sufficient time to plan for and implement a new minimum wage, which is why we are making this announcement now and will continue to advertise this change until it comes into effect on September 1st. The Department of Education, Culture and Employment also recently announced new Labour Market Recovery Program funding, which will provide critical support to businesses looking to rehire workers, prevent further job losses, return or transition operations, or develop training and capacity. This recovery funding is available to employers, organizations, and community partners by contacting regional education, culture, and employment service centres. The decision to increase the minimum wage to $15.20 per hour was informed by the recommendations of the Minimum Wage Committee. To ensure that the views of employees and employers are reflected in decisions about the minimum wage, a minimum wage committee is struck every 2 years and includes representatives from industry, labour, and non-governmental organizations. Committee members work collaboratively to identify options for minimum wage rates that are considered fair for both employees and employers. In developing their recommendations, the committee undertook extensive research on the social and economic conditions of the Northwest Territories, minimum and average hourly wages in other provinces and territories, and the findings of national and international reports and studies. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the committee members for their time, energy, and thoughtful consideration and analysis they put into developing the report and recommendations. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Minister statements, Minister statements, member statements, member statements, member for N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I'm glad that Minister Green brought this up with elders aging in care in their home communities. Elders facilities in Politic and Ulakuktuk in keeping our elders home, Mr. Speaker. Our elders have these facilities in Ulakuktuk and Politic, these in small communities that would not take much to care for elders, but here in our 6-bed long-term care facility, we wouldn't have to send them to N.W.T to be away from the family, which is so tough on our elders right now. Mr. Speaker, our elders in our communities are very active. Our elders work to keep our culture and history alive. They're busy teaching our youth, working with traditional knowledge projects. Thanks to our elders for the traditional activities in our communities, make them thrive. Mr. Speaker, it seems like that we're not so thankful after all sometimes. Our elders need help. We don't seem to have a place for them to go other than sending them out to N.W.T. And the cost of seeing our elders go to N.W.T is, like I said before, it's over $1,000 a plane ticket from Sax or Ulla or Politic. It's unacceptable, Mr. Speaker. I want to work with our government to keep our elders home, to take care of them by ourselves, as a community, as a family. But Mr. Speaker, we owe this to our elders, who they deserve that they deserve to stay home and to keep our knowledge for our home communities. They shared with us, with the territories, with Canada and the world. These are elders, Mr. Speaker, that I wonder prevents us from giving back. I'll ask the Minister for Elders Facilities in Ulakuktuk and Politic to work with the Community Corporation on a go-forward basis. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for N.W.T. Member statements, member statements, member for Tunde-Weldy.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today I would like to discuss the Thai Dena Nene Culture Camp and Spring Hunt taking place in Litzelke, beginning today until March 21st. This camp will be conducted in partnership with the Ni Hatni Dene Guardians and Ni Hariha Traditional Knowledge Monitors. The camp is being co-sponsored by several organizations, including the Litzelke Dene School, the LKDFN Wellness Department, the Department of Lands, ENR, ITA, Parks Canada, and others. And if I missed anybody, forgive me. The full list of contributors can be found at the Land of Our Ancestors website. Mr. Speaker, this camp will be providing youth from Litzelke Dene School with opportunities for hands-on learning and traditional hunting with traditional hunting practices. This camp will be taking place at Haracho Tue, also known as Artillery Lake. It will include a spring hunt, among other things, as I mentioned earlier. And Mr. Speaker, I've been invited to this, and I'll be hopefully, schedule permitting, I'll be able to join in with these guys at some point during the event. And Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the community and commend them for all the coordinators and elders who help plan this event. And to note JC Catholic, who is the primary camp coordinator. I'd like to thank all the co-sponsors as well for contributing to this event. And I know this camp will provide a great opportunity for our youth to interact with and learn from our traditional knowledge holders. I encourage as many youth to participate in this event as possible in the community. And I hope to see more events and camps like these in the future in our riding of Tunde-Weldy. Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Tunde-Weldy. Member statements, member statements, member for Kamloops.
Mr. Speaker, it's time for a little real talk. Pregnancy and childbirth has been a thing for a long time. Pregnancy is painted as a beautiful time where people glow and blossom. Well, the glow is sweat, Mr. Speaker, and the blossom is your cankles trying to fit into your flip-flops because your boots don't fit. Fast forward past the undeniable beauty of weight gain, 10 months of morning sickness, and half a year of cute toes playing xylophone on your rib cage, and you arrive at the big day. With the luxury of a nurse in the family, I labored at home until the 11th hour, and then I hurried to Stanton. I waddled up to the desk, my husband rushing me. Then 40 hours later, I got to push. I spent 3.5 hours trying to evict a child that held firmly to my insides, and on 666, at 6 minutes to the hour, I became a mother for the first time. Whew, the hard part is done, right, Mr. Speaker? Oh no, the fun has just begun. You are past a squishy tiny human and told not to lift anything. You assume breastfeeding is natural and therefore easy. Within days, your nipples are cracked and bleeding, sleep is as elusive as Bigfoot, your body is doing things no one warned you about, and if you are lucky enough to have a supportive partner, they aren't really that useful because no one cares about their nipples. And then there's the tears. And I'm not talking about the baby's tears. Nope, you cry because you're happy, you cry because you're sad, you cry because the sun is shining, and sometimes you cry because your partner is snoring and their nipples are still useless. Beyond sorting out some form of feeding and healing your body, there is sleep deprivation, relationship changes, postpartum blues, and trying not to send yourself over the edge, keeping up with the supermom social media posts from down the block. Welcome, Mr. Speaker, to the 4th trimester. We spend months planning for baby, but those plans rarely include the mother's health, safety, and recovery. What to buy lists include an exhausting amount of baby stuff, but nowhere does it say, put a friend in charge of daily check-ins, buy granny panties, and buy fiber pills. For the love of God, buy the fiber pills. Don't get me wrong, I would do it again. We can finally laugh at the chaos and high-five that we survived, but it doesn't mean we can't evolve how we support and care for new mothers. This is real life, and real is compassionate, honest, and kind. To the new moms, it will get easier, you will be able to sit again, and you will bond. But as you tumble dry through the 4th trimester, be kind to yourself. Eat, sleep, feed the baby, and be kind to yourself. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Kamlik. Member statements, Member for Thabacha.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the midwifery programs in Fort Smith and Hay River have been providing excellent care since their inception. Data from the University of British Columbia demonstrates that health outcomes for patients using midwifery services are equal to or better than the rest of the territory and even the country. N.W.T communities with midwifery services have lower preterm birth rates than those without, and even clients who choose to leave their home communities for birth have lower C-section rates and long breastfeeding duration rates. Mr. Speaker, these excellent health outcomes are directly tied to the culturally safe and relationship-based care of midwifery. Imagine the improvements our people and communities could see if we invested more in midwifery. We could bring down our high infant mortality rate. Half the N.W.T's population is Indigenous, and as our own programs have demonstrated, midwifery clearly helps in addressing the large maternal and infant health disparities of Indigenous people. Mr. Speaker, demand for midwifery services is high. Folks pay for their own travel from communities, especially throughout the debt show. Even people from Yellowknife are seeking care from midwives in Hay River and Fort Smith. Midwifery investments will make access to these services, along with the better health outcomes they provide, more equitable for all people across the N.W.T. Our government, taken note of these facts, has committed to expand midwifery services. We spent a lot of time and money studying how to successfully expand midwifery services, both in 2012 and 2017. Mr. Speaker, based on these studies, along with the strong public support, a plan was made, and in 2019, funds were provided for phase 1 of 3 for midwifery service expansion. After just 1 year of capacity building, the funds to move to phase 2 were not delivered as planned. Our government is now stalling, saying we need to revisit the plan and business case. Our midwifery program has demonstrated excellent outcomes despite being under-resourced since they lack both adequate support from management and appropriate funding levels for staff. The midwifery services in Rankin Inlet recently closed because of these similar problems. Mr. Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to conclude my statement.
Thank you. The member seeking unanimous consent to conclude her statement. Are there any nays? There are no nays. You may conclude your statement.
In closing, Mr. Speaker, now is not the time to falter. Our midwifery services are fragile and require financial investment to continue. Lots of time, money, and energy has been invested in consulting the public and planning. If we fail to invest in our midwifery programs now, we have a risk losing the ground we've worked so hard to gain over the years. I will have questions for the Minister of Health later today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Thabacha. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to say it's a pretty hard act to follow the last couple of statements here there, but in August 2019, Cabinet finally approved the long-awaited Bathurst Caribou Range Plan. That plan calls for a variety of actions, including cumulative land disturbance framework, community guardianship, habitat conservation, mobile caribou conservation measures, road planning and management, offsetting compensatory mechanisms, wildfire and fuels management, and online map staking. It appears much of N.W.T's efforts at trying to assist with recovery of the Bathurst caribou herd have been focused on harvest management and predator control. Harvest management has been in place for years. I want to acknowledge and appreciate the ministers and Indigenous leaders' recent work on the illegal harvesting. I can't say much about wolf control as it's still before the Wekajee Renewable Resources Board, but the ground and aerial shooting program did not yield the expected results. I continue to ask about our efforts at habitat protection and get vague answers on future actions. We should not plan or build roads into the range of the Bathurst caribou herd unless there are some clear signs of recovery and action on habitat protection. The year 2020 was a wash for the Bathurst caribou herd as the calving ground surveys were not carried out, predator control appears to have failed, and very little seems to have been accomplished with regard to habitat protection. I'll have questions for the Minister of Environment and Natural Resources about whether this government is serious about recovery of the Bathurst caribou herd. Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Member statements. Member statements. Member for Yellowknife North.
Mr. Speaker, to be quite honest, I have more faith in our community governments than I own. I believe the structure of community governments allows them to be more nimble. I believe the services they provide their people every day on the ground are more important than much of the work we do in this House. Yet, Mr. Speaker, the N.W.T continues to have a paternalistic relationship with its communities. This is no more apparent than with the relationship with our capital city. Inevitably, Mr. Speaker, in every Yellowknife election, some city councillor decides to talk about a land value tax, a tax that would allow land to be assessed differently and incentivize development, or a vacancy tax to tax some of the long vacant lots in Yellowknife. And then this conversation is quickly stifled because someone has to remind them that they don't have that power. The N.W.T has not given it to them, and likely never will, because I cannot get MACA to bring forward any legislation, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the city of Yellowknife has half the population. It has the capacity to take on many of these issues, and I believe they should. I would like the Department of Municipal Community Affairs to engage discussions on a city charter with them. I would like to have conversations about devolving powers. I can't foresee a legislative assembly where there will ever be agreement on liquor, Mr. Speaker. Yet I believe there is a path forward where we give communities control over what they want their liquor regulations to look forward. I believe we can devolve powers to solve some of the debates in this House we likely never will solve. Mr. Speaker, recently the City of Yellowknife passed a motion in support of granting permanent residents the right to vote. They don't have the power to do that. This House does. Another debate which I don't see a path forward to us actually giving the community what they want. Mr. Speaker, city charters exist for capital cities all across the country. They create a sustainable financial arrangement, and often it forces large cities to take the good times with the bad. If the N.W.T revenues go down, city revenues go down. If N.W.T revenues go up, city revenues go up. We need to have a conversation about where the N.W.T's mandate ends and where our communities start, because we have continually offloaded powers without funding them, and I believe there are significant gaps that were brought forward during this pandemic. I have a question for the Minister of Municipal and Community Affairs about whether we can figure out where our mandate ends and our communities begins. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Yellowknife North. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, over the course of this Assembly, we have heard a lot of conversation around the provision of healthcare services in our communities. There have been requests for community nurses to make house calls and for them to be allowed to leave the health centres in emergency situations. The majority of Canadians have access to emergency medical services in their home if needed. Why do our residents not deserve the same? Why is this critical component of safe emergency care missing in our communities? We have heard several ministers of health and social services time and time again redirect questions of ambulance services to the Department of MACA. One department blaming the other, and the typical siloed government approach continues on, hampering progress. Meanwhile, years pass with no new services coming into existence, and people in communities die. Having a safety background and having been lucky and never injured in a community I was working in, I have a lot of questions about what happens during an emergency. Once a patient is at the health centre and needs to be medevaced out of the community, how does the patient travel from the health centre to the aircraft? How do critically ill patients get to a medevac flight? Is it in the back of a pickup, on a four-wheeler, or in a skidoo? Isn't it our responsibility to get a patient safely from one centre to another for care? All levels of paramedics are licensed in the rest of Canada, so why aren't paramedics professionally licensed in the N.W.T? It's my understanding that the Department of Health and Social Services had been working on legislation to regulate paramedic services in the N.W.T, going as far as the public consultation phase, but then caved to the pressure of a few local providers who didn't want to have to provide the same level of care as down south. This leads to inconsistent delivery of service across the territory, as there are no standardized protocols or procedures for record keeping, drug administration, or risk management. This severely compromises patient safety and is not acceptable. How can we say we are protecting and serving people when we don't even have any definition of how we are going to do it or track any of the results? Why did the Department of HSS not go forward with a community-based paramedicine program? We've seen in the Nunavut region a model for a health authority-based ambulance system that can actually make money rather than lose it. Why are we not looking to replicate this in other northern communities? We have an obligation to keep our patients safe, and that includes during transport, for all of our residents, including those in our primarily Indigenous communities. Recently, Lainey Bolio, a pre-med student from Fort Resolution, took to social media to call out these lack of services for what they are, racism, and I agree. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Great Slave. Member statements. Member statements. Returns to oral questions. Returns to oral questions. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Acknowledgements. Acknowledgements. Oral questions. Oral questions. Member for Haverford South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The questions are for the Minister responsible for ECE. Mr. Speaker, with all of the recent attention on potential changes to the N.W.T school curriculum in the media and news articles suggesting the N.W.T is dropping the Alberta curriculum, can the Minister please clarify if a decision has been made to move away from Alberta? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Haverford South. Minister responsible for Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank you, the member, for asking me this and giving me a chance to clarify. There has been a lot of chatter about this lately, and for those of you who pay attention to what is said in this House, it's been almost 1 year to the day that I've been talking about renewing the curriculum in the Northwest Territories. So this discussion has been ongoing. After our report from the Office of the Auditor General of Canada saying that we need to do something with our education system, we started looking at every single aspect of what we do. And renewing our curriculum was one of those things that we wanted to look at. However, we have not made a decision. We are nowhere near making a decision. We are in the very early stages of seeing what is out there. Alberta is renewing its curriculum now. BC has a modern curriculum. The Yukon uses that curriculum. There's other curriculum developments across Canada, and it's incumbent upon us to ensure that whatever curriculum we use is right for the people of the Northwest Territories. And as I said, Alberta is renewing their curriculum, so one way or another, we're getting a new curriculum. So we need to do our due diligence, but we are a ways away from making any sort of decision. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Haverford South.
Thank you you, Mr. Speaker. I hope that comment about paying attention wasn't directed at me. Mr. Speaker, I'd ask the Minister, why is ECE changing the N.W.T curriculum, and how are those changes made? Will there be opportunity for input from the public or other partners? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Haver South. Minister responsible for EC&E.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, as I stated, we are always looking at our curriculum, always looking at what is new. There's people in the department who this is their job. They focus on curriculum. And as I said, given the Office of the Auditor General results, as well as our own results, as well as the fact that we know we need to do better, we wanted to look and see if perhaps adjusting our curriculum is a way to do that. There's a lot of options. You know, we could, looking forward, we could stay with Alberta's new curriculum. We could adopt create a partnership with another jurisdiction. We could perhaps use K to 8 of one jurisdiction and then use 9 to 12 of Alberta. I mean, there's a lot of opportunities here. So we just want to make sure that we are doing what's right for the students of the Northwest Territories. And ideally, we would be able to develop our own curriculum, but the fact is that it's too costly. It would be well beyond the reach of this territory. In other jurisdictions, their curriculum development shops are huge, and we just don't have that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions, member for Haver South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My third question, I guess he answered part of it. Why can't the N.W.T just develop our own curriculum? But it sounds like it's too expensive. And why do we have to partner with another province? You know, besides the fact that we're talking about money. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Haver South. Minister responsible for EC&E.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And we have to partner with another jurisdiction just for that fact that it is too expensive. That's not to say we don't have a lot of our own curriculum. We have a junior kindergarten curriculum that is really world-class, and other jurisdictions in Canada have approached us about it. We have specific courses developed in the Northwest Territories, things like Northern Studies 10. We're working on Northern Studies 20. We have science courses developed in the territory, the Our Languages curriculum. So we do a lot. But to develop an entire curriculum, the assessments that go along with the curriculum, for example, like the diploma exams that we have now, it's just well beyond our reach, and financially it's just not doable. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Final supplementary, member for Haver South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'll ask the Minister, when will a final decision be made, and then when can we expect the new curriculum to roll out to schools? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Haver South. Minister responsible for education, culture, and employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So we can't do this alone. We're so early on to this, we haven't reached out to our the education bodies yet, to Indigenous governments, to anything like that. So we are starting that process now. We've done a lot of the legwork, but there's still much more to do. The decision would come in the summer at the earliest, and if we were to adopt a new curriculum, it wouldn't be rolling out until 2022. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions, member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Earlier today, I discussed how predator control measures for the Bathurst caribou herd were ineffective and the lack of progress on habitat protection while the Slave Geological Province Road continues to steamroll right along. Can the Minister of Environment and Natural Resources tell us what specific actions have been undertaken in the last year to protect key habitat for the Bathurst caribou herd? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for Environment and Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for giving me these questions ahead of time because it's going to be pretty detailed on this one here. The range plan made 9 recommendations to manage total disturbance on the range of the Bathurst caribou herd and to reduce the management impact on the caribou and the caribou habitat. We are working on all 9 recommendations and that have begun. Habitat conservation is recommended in the Bathurst range plan, specifically in areas important to the caribou to maintain migration routes such as key water crossings and land corridors. ENR is supporting Indigenous governments and organizations to document these key habitat features and to provide them for consideration. As I said previously in this House, Mr. Speaker, we continue to work collaboratively to identify appropriate legislative tools to advance establishment of conservation areas, and we've established a new fire crew in Wekwaji to allow faster response to fire on bare ground caribou winter habitat. We've established a caribou gardening program, as also recommended in the range plan. Significant work has continued to collaborate, develop a network of community-based programs that will monitor and report on caribou habitat. And Mr. Speaker, it's all part of the picture. It's our wildlife, it's the conservation of our management of legal hunting, respectful hunting, the wolf program, and our habitat. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the Minister for his minister's statement there. No, look, I do appreciate the work that he and his staff are doing on this. I just wish it was a little bit faster. So I described some of the actions and tools that are supposed to be taking place as part of the implementation of the Bathurst Range Plan. And the Minister himself mentioned the cumulative land disturbance framework. So can the Minister tell us whether this framework has been applied against the proposed Slave Geological Province Road? And if so, can he share that analysis with MLAs and the public? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for ENR.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll try to keep my minister's statement short on this answer here, but we want to make sure we get that detail and information out there. So the framework was applied against the proposed Slave Geological Province Road. It was a technical package was supported in the to the Bathurst Caribou Range Plan, and yes, we'll be able to provide it to Sketty. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I appreciate the Minister's short answer. Yes, there, that was great. As the Minister obviously knows, exploration and development in the range of the Bathurst Caribou herd is probably at an all-time low since the 1980s as a result of the pandemic. Now would seem to be a great time to finally develop and implement mobile caribou conservation measures that would provide temporary habitat protection. So can the Minister tell us about the status of the promised mobile caribou conservation measures and when we can expect them to see them finally implemented? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for ENR.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. ENR will finalize the framework by this summer. Draft framework has provided guidance to a pilot project that was done in collaboration with industry partner or geoscience. But because of COVID, we had to do a desktop exercise. The outcome of the project was the need for an operational guidance document, and we are working on developing that with our geoscience, and we plan to test this operational document this summer. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the Minister for that. I look forward to seeing the results of that. Of course, what elders and biologists alike say is that we need to permanently protect key habitat for barren ground and boreal caribou as part of a balanced program. So with low levels of activity and interest, we've got things like land use planning, but we also need other forms of permanent land withdrawals or protection. Can the Minister tell us what our government is doing with regard to permanent protection of key habitat for the Bathurst caribou herd? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for Environment and Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Key habitat is identified a collaborative process with our Indigenous governments and organizations, and it helps us identify key areas that could be considered habitat protection under the Wildlife Act. ENR has a series of workshops with partners to identify and prioritize area of protection. and we're completing input from our partners, and we'll collaboratively work on the plan to clarify key areas to be considered for habitat protection. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my questions are for the Minister of Health and Social Services. Can the Minister tell me how patients get from the health centre to the Medevac flight in communities with no ambulance service? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Great Slave. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I'm sure the member can appreciate, with 33 different communities, there are a number of different ways of getting there. One possibility is local emergency service providers, such as the fire department or the RCMP. In some places, there are ground transportation contracts that are available through a competitive bid. In some cases, community governments provide that service. And in some cases, in fact, people do it themselves with whatever equipment they have available. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it'd be great if the Minister could send me the breakdown of the different communities and their response plans for ground transportation. For question number 2, when will paramedics be licensed in the Northwest Territories, and when will adjustments be made to the Act in order to enable this service? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Great Slave. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the opportunity to clarify the fact that paramedics are licensed in the N.W.T. and no changes are required to the Act. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Great Slave.
That's great to hear. Thank you. I guess that my next question may be redundant, but community-based paramedics programs have clinical evidence of their success in Northern Ontario, BC, and Alberta. Why was community-based paramedicine programs discontinued here in the Northwest Territories, considering that the Canadian Armed Forces was willing to partner with the Northwest Territories? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Great Slave. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to clarify here as well. In fact, what took place in Sigachik was a pilot program to train local community members as first responders beginning in 2019. And the good news about this pilot program is that 16 community members did receive emergency response training. That work, however, has not progressed from that stage, and it is in the Health Department's work plan to engage with MACA to discuss next steps on how we can build on this pilot, and the next steps are due by September of this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I guess I've got my facts wrong, but I will check back with my research and take a look at that. My last question is, would the Minister tell us her position on whether or not she finds the discrepancies in our healthcare system due to systemic racism? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Great Slave. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not going to offer an opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today I want to bring up my member statement in regards to elders staying home. And you know as well as I do, we take care of our own and we take care of our elders. I want to know what care facilities are currently available in our communities of Paulatuk and YELLOWKNIFE right now. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for N.W.T. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if the member is talking about long-term care facilities, there are none in his riding. If he's talking about home care support so that people receive services while in their own homes, every community in the Beaufort Delta and in his riding has home care services available. They are usually provided by the healthcare center, and they work with elders and their family to deliver the services that are identified as required under a nursing assessment. And that could be a full range of things, from help with bathing and mobility, light housekeeping, meal preparation, and so on. Tuktoyaktuk as well is one of the sites of the Paid Family Caregiver Program, where this pilot project is providing up to 4 hours a week of additional supports to 5 elders in the community, and we're very interested to see the outcome of this, whether it's a way forward to provide more community support. So, there is quite a bit of home care, but long-term care is only available closest to him in Inuvik. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for N.W.T.
Mr. Speaker, next steps, I guess I'm working with our housing minister, health minister, in regards to getting elders facilities in both Paulatuk and Ulukaktuk that we need, because flying, like I said before, flying to Nuvik's over $1,000 to go see one of your loved ones, and the only time you'll get to go there is if you're going there for medical. It really hurts and impacts families deeply when they're sending an elder to Inuvik for long-term care. We need to fix this problem. We could find money for anything in regards to when it comes to bigger projects and stuff like this, but something like this, working with the N.W.T Development Corporation, the Community Corp, and our government, are they willing to work together to take those next steps in regards to providing elders facilities in those two communities? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for N.W.T. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the issue here with long-term care is economies of scale. There are 12 elders in Sex Harbour who are 60 plus, 43 in Ulahaktuk, 31 in Paulatuk, and 139 in Tuktoyaktuk. So that's a very small population from which to build a long-term care centre that benefits from the economies of scales. I think the minimum size is 16 beds. So I don't think that it's feasible to do long-term care in those communities because of the size of them. However, we have heard from Mr. Colin Okina from Ulahaktuk, and he has requested that we meet with him and his community corporation to talk about elders' facilities in his communities, and we've agreed to that. We wrote to him at the end of February and suggested that he call the office and set up a meeting. Thank you.
Minister, oral questions. Member for N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think I thank the Minister for that, for reaching out to Mr. Okina, and I really think we're the demographic size of the community, or from distance from Inuvik to Ulu, or to Ulu to Sax, or to Paulatuk or Tuk. It shouldn't matter. It shouldn't matter for the money that we're spending. These elders were here first. We're here first and born and raised. We got to take care of our elders. Money shouldn't be the main issue. I know we're stretched like man, we're stretched. It's so like a rubber band. But the thing is, my elders deserve this. My elders need to stay home. Our families need to be kept together, because you know it as well as I do. As soon as they go to Inuvik, they don't last long. And I don't mean to say that, and I know I'm not trying to hurt nobody's feelings or nothing. But at the end of the day, our elders were born and raised in the Northwest Territories, and we demand service. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for N.W.T. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the members' passion on this topic and the desire to keep people at home. It is our mandate to help seniors age in place with dignity, and of course that's every senior in the N.W.T. The way that long-term care works is that people don't go into long-term care unless they have 24/7 nursing needs or chronic conditions, complex conditions that need full-time nursing care. So unfortunately, the reason that people don't last a long time after they go into long-term care is because they're already pretty ill. And the average stay in long-term care is around about 2.5 years. So I appreciate that is not an outcome that anyone wants. The outcome that people want is for elders to stay in their community. And as I've said previously, there's a combination here of home care support, which is provided by the Department of Health and Social Services, and a facility in which the elders can live, which is within the Department of N.W.T. Housing Corporation. And I've committed, and the Housing Corporation Minister has agreed that we will work together to sort out how we can make this Aging in Place pledge a reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary, member for N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, just for the record, I want, in regards to, will the Minister commit and her colleague of Housing to commit to work with myself and the community of Polituck and Ulakaktuk in the N.W.T. riding to work together to provide, to try to see if we could get long-term facilities? Would she commit to that? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For N.W.T. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I've articulated my commitment, and that is my commitment. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Oral questions. Member for Yellowknife North.
Mr. Speaker, the starting point in any conversation about our municipal powers is that they are presently a mess. 24 of our communities either fall under the City, Towns and Villages Act, the Hamlets Act, the Charters Community Act, or the Tulicho Government Act. And the remaining 9 communities are designated authorities and fall under the Indian Act. I am surprised the N.W.T can find agreement on anything. And as such, whenever a problem falls that only applies to one of those specific pieces of legislation, there is no support for the other communities. 6 of our communities administer their own taxes, 18 MACA does it, and then a remaining 9 pay no tax at all. My main concern is getting the Department of MACA to bring forward some legislation that sorts out these various pieces and the powers. So my first question is, will the department bring forward the City, Towns and Villages Act and some of the corresponding other legislation during the life of this Assembly?
Member for Yellowknife North, Minister responsible for Municipal and Community Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I first of all want to comment on the history of the Northwest Territories and the way that we operate is in a very unique, dynamic way of administrating throughout the territory. We do have designated communities. We do have communities that are acquiring self-government. We do have settled land claim areas as well, and we have such a strong, rich history here in the territory. So looking at the Cities, Towns and Villages Act and when it was established to create the municipalities of the Northwest Territories, we've kind of evolved with the legislation, but also knowing that the Indigenous groups have come forward to create their own set of governing aspects. So with that, this is a very unique approach that does not exist in the northern part of the territory and the northern part of Canada. We don't have a charter that is currently established, but the City of Yellowknife has not designated this as a priority. We are looking at the taxation and we are looking at the Fire Prevention Act right now. So the conversation continues, but just to answer the member's question, no, this will not be brought forward in the lifetime of this government. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister, oral questions. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the complexity here. I guess my concern is I want to find some work to progress the work on the City, Towns and Villages Act and surrounding it. I know the department started work on the Fire Prevention Act back in 2008, and hopefully we see that in the life of this Assembly. I recognize there was years of work to actually get this done. And it gets to the heart of the N.W.T. Are we going to have public governments in the future, or are we going to have more private governments? Presently, we have legislated that there are public governments across the Northwest Territories, and I would like to see that debate happen. But to do that, I need the department to begin some of the work on these various pieces of legislation. So is the department ready to begin that work, and maybe the next Assembly can see some legislation? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Yellowknife North. Minister responsible for MACA.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the legislation brought forward and with the support of N.W.T and the City of Yellowknife, we are concentrating on the property taxation, as I've stated, and also the fire prevention. They've listed these as 2 priorities. So with that, I am confident that my department will bring those 2 forward, and we will see those changes. And also looking at the evolvement of the Northwest Territories as well too, and looking at the municipal governments, I honestly want to say say that conversations do happen at with the Indigenous governments as well too, whether we're going to see self-government during this lifetime of this Assembly, whether we're going to see agreements going forward. It really changes the direction of municipal and community affairs and how we are going to be working with the smaller communities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister, oral questions. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the reasons the City of Yellowknife wants to see a city charter, and I want to see it, it's a fiscal arrangement. The City of Yellowknife is the only jurisdiction where a percentage of their taxes have to fund the education system. It's the only city that has a property tax base that could actually fund municipal services. There's a reason we have tax-paying communities and non-tax-paying communities. But whenever the City of Yellowknife asks for a change to how they can administer taxes, they're told no, because the conversation is only relevant to the City of Yellowknife. So in part of the Property Assessment and Taxation Act conversation, which we'll see, is it possible to have a separate fiscal arrangement and some different tax powers for the City of Yellowknife? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Yellowknife North. Minister responsible for MECA.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, to have a submission brought forward that is going to separate and looking at the Indigenous groups within the City of Yellowknife as well too, this is a really sensitive topic, and I would have to bring this back to my department in order to making sure that we are productively moving along, but also clarifying, is this a priority for the City of Yellowknife and the Indigenous groups within the city as well? Then it would change the approach that MACA and our involvement as well too, to better support what are the priorities for the city. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I guess a heads up, during the Property Assessment and Taxation Act, I'm going to be requesting, the ability for municipalities to implement vacancy taxes, to have land value taxes, to have different tax tools that the department won't let them. So can I get the minister to commit that they can go away and educate themselves on what city charters and these fiscal arrangements look like in other jurisdictions in preparation for further questions? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Yellowknife North. Minister responsible for Municipal and Community Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I hear the member's passion as well. This is not the first time he has brought this up with the charter for the City of Yellowknife, and reflecting and elaborating on the taxation as well too. But I wanted to really emphasize that this is a very sensitive issue, and it involves more parties than just the City of Yellowknife as well. I will provide the member with a current update and a current status of the ongoing conversation with the Department of MACA and the City of Yellowknife. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Oral questions. Member for Thabacha.
Mr. Speaker, the 2017 N.W.T. Midwifery Stakeholder Engagement Report was 75 pages long. Can the minister tell us if her department is ready to implement all 10 recommendations to ensure that all communities have access to births in their home communities within the life of the 19th Assembly? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Thabacha. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for the question. As I said in February, we, the Department of Health and Social Services, have been successful in completing 5 out of 10 recommendations. The department continues towards moving to the completion of the remaining 5 recommendations. And we previously committed and continue to commit to coming up with a preliminary plan on how to implement these recommendations in June of 2021. The next phase of this plan is phase 2. If it has funding, it would provide 4 midwives in Yellowknife, 1 in Hay River, and 1 in Fort Smith. It would not provide a way for women who live in small communities with health cabins to have their children in their own communities. Birthing is really a centralized process. Thank you.
Minister, oral questions. Member for Thabacha.
Mr. Speaker, can the minister tell us how her department will implement all 10 recommendations of the 2017 Midwifery Report? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Thabacha. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The plan is now 4 years old. we have committed to reviewing it. We have committed to costing out the remainder of the 5 recommendations, and we've said that we will provide that information by June of 2021. Thank you.
Questions? Member for Thabacha.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, can the minister provide a timeline for when her department expects more communities to have midwifery services in the N.W.T? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Thabacha. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Hay River and Fort Smith have midwifery services at this point, and the idea of hiring one additional midwife for each of these locations is to stabilize the program. The next community on the list for midwives is Yellowknife, and as I already said, that would require the hiring of 4 midwives. There are some conversations going on about how the program could be expanded beyond that. So today, this very day, there's consultation going on with Fort Resolution community members and healthcare workers to find out whether they are interested in having midwives, whether they would prefer to have a doula program or an Indigenous caregiver program. So those are the kinds of things that we would like to hear, not only in Fort Resolution, but in the Decho and in Betchco as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary, Member for Thabacha.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, can the minister tell us when our department expects to enter into phase 2 of the midwifery service expansion? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Thabacha. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I've said previously in this House, phase 2 of the midwifery program does not have funding in the current budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Oral questions. Member for Kamloops.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My questions today, too, are also for the Minister of Health and Social Services. Mr. Speaker, over the last year, the 4th trimester has drastically changed for new mothers. We've spent decades telling new moms to get out and stay active, only to now tell them to stay home and stay alone. How have the supports for new moms changed or evolved over the last year in the Northwest Territories? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Kamloops. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member for introducing a new term for me, the 4th trimester. For a moment there, I thought the pregnancy might have been extended for an entire year, but I understand now that this is the first 3 months of the baby's life. Of course, as the member said in her statement, it's common for new parents, especially first-time parents, to be anxious about how to care for their baby, their family, and themselves. And certainly, it is not a time where we want people to feel alone and unsupported. And we realize that COVID-19 has, in fact, had that kind of an effect. But, you know, having said that, the health system continues to deliver health programs. So clients can access different kinds of programs and services for postpartum care. There's postnatal care at 6 weeks with their primary care practitioner, where an additional postpartum and mental health screening is provided to catch any issues that are prevalent at that point. There's also comprehensive care available at that same 6-week mark if the person is within the midwifery program. And there are also virtual postpartum classes that are delivered by Yellowknife Public Health to those who need to stay at home. So we are willing to provide the services. We are hoping that parents will articulate what they need, and we will be able to respond to that with the specific services they need. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Kamloops.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate that there is existing services available. I can say I've used some of them myself as a new mom. All of my babies were born in Yellowknife. I'm wondering if the Minister of Health and Social Services is willing to evaluate postpartum supports to new mums by engaging with recent and new mums to ensure they are meeting this generation of mums at the right time and with the right support. An example of this is traditionally, like the Minister said, new mums are seen at 6 weeks in order to give the mums a chance to say, okay, let's check on you now. But maybe in an environment where now we're spending a lot more time at home, there's a lot more, uncertainty about the world, people are using social media a lot more, maybe it's more relevant for that to be moved up to 3 weeks. And so I'm wondering if the Department of Health and Social Services will commit to engaging with new mums to see what they are looking for. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Kamloops. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the department is always working with new parents to understand what they need and how we could better support them. That is a core part of our mandate. We don't need to be directed to find out how they're feeling. This is the ongoing work of the department. We, of course, could always offer more services and deliver them in different ways. And so we are interested in looking at our prenatal and postnatal education programming and delivery, and making sure that it is as effective as can be, that not only is it effective, but it's grounded in traditional knowledge and presents a culturally safe option for Indigenous moms. The department has, as I mentioned, conducted extensive engagement with parents and families through the midwifery review that was referenced earlier this afternoon, and all of this information will be included in our continuous evaluation of what we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Kamloops.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, since the department is always looking for new ways to serve new parents, I'm wondering if the department is willing to look at new ways to communicate with parents. Asking for help can be very hard, and asking for help when you need it, it might actually be something like 2 o'clock in the morning. Our next generation of new mums are heavily invested in virtual communication through social media and text messaging, so I'm wondering if the Minister will commit to establishing new communication protocols in the Northwest Territories that accommodate text messaging supports for new mums so that they have access to N.W.T support when they need it in a communication style that suits them. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Kamloops. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, midwives in particular have always engaged their clients using a variety of methods, and in the current communications environment that includes phone, text, FaceTime, and video conferencing. And this particular engagement is being considered in the expansion of midwifery services in the Yellowknife area, which I referenced earlier. And so how to meet current needs is certainly on our radar. We don't expect everybody to pack up the baby and come into the office. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral question, final supplementary. Member for Kamloops.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm definitely excited for the changes that the midwifery program will present to the Northwest Territories, but the fact of the matter is not everybody has access to a midwife or uses one. And so I'm wondering if this is a change that can be made at the public health level, because every new mom is connected to public health. And I'm wondering if public health can take on I guess the responsibility or the option of passing along a phone number to new moms that they're able to text somebody when they need it. This can be, and many people that work for public health are already on call. They probably already carry a cell phone, and so I'm wondering if this cell phone number can be provided to new moms to use within the first 3 months, if and when they need it, because being a new parent can be very scary. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Kamloops. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure what's possible in terms of having public health on call to a greater extent than they are now, but that's certainly something I can inquire about and get back to the member with. Thank you.
Minister, oral questions. Oral questions. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to assure the Minister of Education, Culture and Employment that I wasn't dozing off, and he did have my attention when he announced the minimum wage increase today. But I want to ask him about the, I raised this issue about the minimum wage committee in a previous member's statement. I think he received some kind of report. Is he willing to make that report public? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for education, culture and employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'll have to give the same answer I gave last time with this question, that this report was prepared as advice for Cabinet, and it was prepared by people who were assured that they would be kept confidential, and I'm not prepared to go back on that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions, member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the Minister for that response, but, all we have is the Minister's statement and news release about on what basis the Minister made this very important decision. Can the Minister not at least talk about what the recommendations were from the committee and share those recommendations with the public? And merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for EC&E.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The committee made 3 recommendations as was asked for. One of the recommendations always the status quo. One of the recommendations was also increasing it to 1520. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions, member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I guess I have to guess what the 3rd recommendation was, but I'm not going to try to do any math on my feet here. Actually, I will. So we have the wage top-up program ending on August 31st, as I understand it, so $18 an hour. The very next day, people are going to see their hourly wages drop to $15.20. Just doesn't seem to make any sense. So can the Minister explain to the public that, the people that the 9% of our workforce that is now accessing the wage top-up program, why he chose $15.20, and can he explain why their wages are going to drop from $18 an hour one day to $15.20 the next? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for EC&E.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Their wages will drop because currently there is a wage top-up program in place, and that runs until August 31st. The next day, the wage top-up program will no longer be operational, and people who are making minimum wage will start receiving $15.20 an hour from their employer without that additional top-up. And I just want to point out the minimum wage is just that, it's a minimum wage. It's, I think less than 1,000 people in the territory make minimum wage. Most of them are between 15 and 24. Most of them are living at home. And perhaps a higher wage will help them get out of that house sooner. But the fact is this is not a demographic of people who are counting on a minimum wage to raise a family for the most part. And a lot of those positions as well come with gratuities. So a number of those people making minimum wage also make tips on top of it. So, I appreciate what the member is saying. I was very happy to see that the wage top-up was extended because I do want to make sure that we are providing for our residents. However, we can't expect our businesses to absorb such a great increase in cost over the course of one summer, from the $13.46 to something like $18 an hour. It's just not feasible. It's not the way that businesses are structured right now. However, that being said, we now have the 2nd highest minimum wage in Canada. We will on September 1st. I think that's something to be celebrated. I don't think we've ever been in that position before. And the only one with a higher minimum wage is Nunavut, where the cost of living is much higher as well. So it's appropriate for what we have in the territory. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Minister,
final supplementary, member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the Minister for that. I'm looking actually at the Department of Finance website. The number of individuals that have accessed the wage top-up program as of March 10th is 2,360, not the 1,000 that the Minister just kind of mentioned. 96 participating businesses. Look, this is a very significant portion of our workforce. They're going to see their wages drop in one day. That's just not fair, Mr. Speaker. So, I've tried a number of different avenues here to try to get the Minister to recognize this is a real problem and issue. But, what other solutions does the Minister have? He doesn't seem to agree with the idea of a guaranteed basic income. What are the Minister's solutions to trying to help people make ends meet? The 2,360 people that are already accessing the wage top-up program. Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There may be 2,360 people accessing the wage top-up program. That doesn't mean there's 2,360 people making minimum wage once that program goes away. Those are two different numbers. One is 18 and one is right now 1346. So there's a difference there. What do we have in place, Mr. Speaker? That's why I work so hard on education. That's why we're working hard on making investments in early childhood. That's why we're trying to expand the number of early childhood spaces there are for children so that they can get in there and get in an enriched environment starting at the beginning of their life. That's why we're reviewing the curriculum, Mr. Speaker, to make sure that it's a curriculum the kids want so that they want to go to school and so that it helps them grow and it helps them learn and so that it can help them get to that next level and get those jobs. That's why we're looking at our SFA program. That's why we have the best SFA program in Canada, Mr. Speaker. We have the most generous student financial assistance program in Canada to help students get that post-secondary education. And that is the biggest contributor to improving your wages, getting a post-secondary education. That's where we need to focus our efforts, Mr. Speaker, not putting this on the backs of businesses. This is on us, and this is what we are doing. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions, oral questions. Written questions, written questions. Returns to written questions, returns to written questions. Replies to Commissioner's address, replies to Commissioner's address. Petitions, petitions. Reports of committees on the review of bills, reports of committees on the review of bills. Reports of standing and special committees, reports of standing and special committees. Tabling of documents, tabling of documents. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the following two documents. Projected demand for long-term care beds in the N.W.T. Bureau of Statistics, August 2020, and Department of Health and Social Services response to long-term care bed projections. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Tabling of documents, tabling of documents. Notices of motion, notices of motion. Motions, motions. Member for Yellowknife North.
I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for Hay River North, that notwithstanding Rule 4, when this House adjourns on Friday, March 12, 2021, it shall be adjourned until Monday, March 29, 2021. And further, that any time prior to March 29, 2021, if the Speaker is satisfied, after consultation with the Executive Council and members of the Legislative Assembly, that the public interest requires that the House should meet at an earlier time during the adjournment, or at a time later than the scheduled resumption of the House, the Speaker may give notice, and thereupon the House shall meet at the time stated in such notice, and shall transact its business as if it had been duly adjourned to that time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Yellowknife North. Motion is in order to the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? Any abstentions? The motion is carried. Motions, motions. Notices of motion for the first reading of bills. Notices of motion for the first reading of bills. Minister responsible for infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I give notice that on Monday, March 29, 2021, I move that Bill 23, an act to amend the Revolving Fund Act, be read for the first time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Notices of motion for the first reading of bills. Minister responsible for Education, Culture and Employment.
Mr. Speaker, I give notice that on Monday, March 29th, 2021, I will move that Bill 24, an act to amend the Education Act, be read for the first time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oh.
I apologize, Mr. Speaker, if I may. Mr. Speaker, I give notice that on Monday, March 29th, 2021, I will move that Bill 25, an act to amend the Education Act, be read for the first time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oh. Oops. We will return back to Minister responsible for infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I give notice that on Monday, March 29, 2021, I'll move that Bill 24, an act to amend the Revolving Fund Act, be read for the first time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
As amended, as amended. Notice is a motion for the first reading of bills. Notice is a motion for the first reading of bills. First reading of bills. First reading of bills. Second reading of bills. Second reading of bills. Member for N.W.T.
Mr. Speaker, I move, second by the Honourable Member of Thebacha, that Bill 23, an act to amend the Public Utilities Act, be read for the second time. Mr. Speaker, this bill amends the Public Utilities Act to prohibit the public utility from disconnecting residential customers' electricity services during the period of October 1 to April 30th, or when the temperature forecast is below zero because of the amount payable is overdue. Required to a public utility to reconnect the residential customer service which was disconnected during the period of May 1 to September 30th because of an amount payable overdue by October 1st or as soon as practical. To prohibit the public utility from installing a device to limit the amount of power and electricity to provide to the residential customer because the amount payable is overdue. And allow the public utility to require a residential customer to enter into a payment plan before reconnecting the customer's electricity service during the period of May 1st to September 30th. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for N.W.T. The motion is in order to the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? Member Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Cabinet has serious concerns about what is proposed by this bill. If Bill 23 were to become law, it would essentially create a right to receive power while removing the obligation to pay for it. This would have a number of negative impacts on our residents. We would undoubtedly see some customers become burdened with large and perpetually growing debts, and as a consequence, the power companies would see their uncollectible debts grow. This isn't just speculation. We saw it happen last year when NTPC paused collections, ceased disconnections, and removed load limiters during the first months of COVID-19. Ultimately, the lost revenue created as a result of this bill would have to be recouped through the ratepayers, meaning higher power rates and higher bills for everyone. Mr. Speaker, this Assembly made reducing the cost of power a priority, and this bill would almost certainly have the opposite effect. However, Mr. Speaker, Cabinet is willing to let this bill go through the process, and we will be abstaining from this vote. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Government House Leader. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? Any abstentions? The motion is carried. Bill 23 has received second reading and is referred to Standing Committee. Second reading of bills. Second reading of bills. Consideration in Committee of the Whole of bills and other matters. Bill 3, Bill 12, 13, 14, and 16. Bill 20, Committee Report 8, 9, and 10-19 brackets 2. Minister Statement 77-19 brackets 2. Table document 165, 166, 167, 286, 348, 349-19 brackets 2. By the authority given to me as Speaker by motion 1-19 brackets 2, I hereby authorize the House to sit beyond the daily hours of adjournment to consider the business before the House with Member for Medevac Lakes and the Chair.
Of the whole to order. What is the wish of committee? Member for Tunade-Willade.
Madam Chair, committee would like to consider the following items. Bill 16, Committee Report 10-19 bracket 2, Bill 3, Bill 12, Bill 13, Bill 14, Table Document 165-19 bracket 2, and Table Document 166 bracket 2, table document 167-19 bracket 2, and Minister's Statement 17-19 bracket 2. Mr. Manager.
Thank you. Does committee agree? Thank you, committee. We will take a short recess and resume with the first item. clause I now call Committee of the Whole back to order. Committee, we have agreed to consider Bill 16 first, an act to amend the Income Tax Act. I will ask the Minister of Finance to introduce the bill.
Madam Chair, I'm here to present Bill 16, an act to amend the Income Tax Act. The main purpose of Bill 16 is to reduce the tax burden on our small businesses by reducing the small business tax rate from 4% down to 2%. With this reduction, Northwest Territories small businesses will incur a tax rate of 2% on taxable income under $500,000. Any taxable income over $500,000 will continue to be subject to the general corporate tax rate of 11.5%. This proposed measure will become effective on January 1st, 2021. We are also taking this opportunity to propose 2 housekeeping measures to keep the legislation current and maintain value harmonization with federal income tax legislation. The first housekeeping measure proposes changes in the calculation of the territorial age credit to include taxable split income to ensure seniors are not able to claim a higher age credit than they would otherwise be entitled. The second housekeeping measure proposes changes in the calculation of the territorial pension credit. This measure will allow Canadian veterans with certain income benefits received under the Federal Veterans Wellbeing Act to claim the territorial pension credit. That concludes my opening remarks, Madam Chair. I'm happy to answer questions the members may have.
Thank you, Minister. I will now turn to the Chair of Standing Committee on Government Operations, the committee that considered the bill for the opening comments.
Just wait. An act to amend the Income Tax Act received second reading in the Legislative Assembly on November the 2nd, 2020, and was referred to the Standing Committee on Government Operations for review. On February the 25th, 2021, the Standing Committee held a public hearing with the Minister of Finance and completed its clause-by-clause review of the bill. I thank the committee for their efforts in reviewing this legislation. Individual members may have additional comments or questions.
Thank you. Minister, would you like to bring witnesses into the chamber? Yes, ma'am. Sergeant-at-Arms, please escort the witness into the chamber. Minister, please introduce your witnesses for the record.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, on my left is Kelly Bluck, Director of Fiscal Policy from the Department of Finance, and on the right, Sherry Girock, Legislative Counsel with Legislation Division from the Department of Justice.
Thank you. I will now open the floor to general comments on Bill 16. Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I just wanted to express my gratitude for this change. I think that this is a time when businesses can use the support and can also use their finances in better ways to grow and evolve their businesses. And so I appreciate the effort on behalf of the Minister in order to make this change. And I'd like to just say thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Member for Frame Lake.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I don't have any difficulty with the administrative changes here for the most part. I guess I am concerned about the reduction in the small business tax rate. Can the Minister tell me why we're doing this? Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Minister?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Madam Chair, we are a little bit behind some of the other jurisdictions in terms of our business tax rate for small businesses, and this finally is an opportunity to bring us a little bit more in line and make us more competitive with some of our colleagues across the rest of Canada. Up to this point, we were at or near, in fact, the very top of the pile. So this is an opportunity to, again, make us more competitive, and it's a good time. I think one of the MLAs has already mentioned that it's an opportunity to give a bit of relief at an occasion and during a context where there's been quite a lot of challenges for small businesses, for all businesses over the last year. But again, this is one where really we're getting ourselves to be more aligned with the rates that you see across the rest of Canada. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Member for Frame Lake?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Yeah, so I take it from what the minister said that, this is really about tax fairness, being competitive and so on. That's all good. Can the minister tell me how much revenues were N.W.T is going to lose as a result of this reduction? Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Minister?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I believe the reduction is approximately $1.4 million.
Thank you. Member?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Are there any plans then to make up this lost revenue somewhere else in the tax system? Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Minister?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, it's not, this is not an occasion where there will be a commensurate raising of taxes or introduction of a new tax to directly offset the 1.4 million revenue loss. What is hoped, however, is that by helping the sector become more competitive and helping small businesses be more competitive, that we will see economic growth, which then can ultimately help create more taxpayers in the form of more small businesses, which can hopefully offset the revenue loss from the tax rate change. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Member?
Thanks, Madam Chair. So I take it from what the minister said, there's not going to be any efforts to look at replacing the revenues in some way. How's the minister going to apply this this concept of tax fairness across the other kinds of taxes that we have to pay? And look, I heard the minister characterize taxes as burdens earlier on. Taxes are actually the price of civilization. Governments don't run without taxes or some source of revenues. So how is the minister going to apply this concept of fairness across other parts of the tax system? Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Minister?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, at this point in the course of of where we're at in our response to the pandemic and recovery from the pandemic, there was certainly a conscious decision that there would not be new taxes introduced in this particular budget, that there are no new taxes introduced in this particular budget. So that's sort of a short-term response. I understand that the question really is looking at something much larger and much broader. And I have made inquiries with the department to look into what impacts there would be on individuals if we were to increase the tax burden for certain filers. And at this point, the benefits are such that unless we were to increase rates significantly, we would not be seeing an offset of this tax savings. We would simply be putting a pretty significant burden on a very small number of people, without necessarily actually making up for this particular change. So at this moment in time, Madam Chair, again, there's not an increase intended or expected to whether it's to other income tax rates on personal side or on the corporate side. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Member?
Thanks, Madam Chair. I do appreciate that. So, is the minister willing to share some of that kind of analysis that you talked about? In the past, there's been, revenue options papers generated by finance ministers. Is the minister willing to make public perhaps an updated version of a tax options paper or revenue options paper then in preparation for the next budget? Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Minister?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I was pleased to get that suggestion last year, probably around this time, and I'm happy to receive it and be reminded again. The process of going through budget dialogues and putting some of the information out was very helpful to me in this role, but I think also to the department. So we will certainly make sure that we engage in that process, and I think without having adapted to COVID-19, it'll be earlier this year than last year. Thank you.
Thank you. Member?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Yeah, I appreciate it. And I did look at the materials that the minister had used for her dialogue. It was, you know, I think the tax stuff was on just a couple of slides, so a fuller version of an options paper would be much more helpful. Is that something the minister can do? Thanks, Madam Chair.
Minister?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, we'll certainly make sure that there's a more fulsome discussion around what the tax impacts could be for introducing or modifying otherwise tax rates. Thank you.
Thank you. Member?
Thanks, Madam Chair. So I appreciate the responses from the minister. I am about tax fairness, and I just want to give the minister a couple of ways in which she could raise $1.4 million for the public record. She could actually keep the rental fees that are in the current exploration license for Husky Energy and carry those over into the significant discovery license and raise $1.4 million a year. So that's one option. She doesn't really have to do very much on that one. The other one, and I've said this before, we're one of the few jurisdictions in Canada that only has 3 personal income tax brackets. Alberta has 5, and they went to that in 2016. British Columbia has 5. They went to that in 2014. New Brunswick has 6. They went to that in 2015. Newfoundland and Labrador has 5. They did that in 2015. Nova Scotia has 5. They did that in 2010. Ontario has 5. They did that in 2014. Yukon has 5. They did that in 2015, and the federal government went to 5 in 2016. So I don't understand why we still only have 3. But, that is, I think, something that I want to encourage the finance minister to look at. I am about tax fairness, and we do need to help the least advantaged people in our society, and that means sometimes rich people have to pay more, and that includes me. So, and I'm happy to have that public debate and discussion. So there's a couple of areas that I would like the minister to seriously consider to replace the lost revenue from this lowering of the small business tax rate. Thanks, Madam Chair. I think that's all I've got for now. Thanks.
Thank you. Member, Minister?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I agree that is the kind of debate that should be happening in the House. So again, I'll certainly commit to getting some of the details and financial numbers to the House so that discussion can be brought to the floor.
Thank you, Minister. Are there any further questions? Oh, yeah. Sorry, Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, first of all, I just want to say that I'm in support of this reduction. I often heard last year about how we needed to support small businesses better. The majority of the businesses in the Northwest Territories would be considered to be small businesses. So injecting $1.4 million back into our private sector, where I believe it will actually be used much more efficiently with better return on our investment than perhaps done by the government of the Northwest Territories. No detriment to the Minister's Department. However, I think this is an excellent thing, and I actually would encourage and support a further reduction for small businesses in the North. I think this is wonderful. We weren't able at the beginning to necessarily provide relief to businesses as we took care of health and safety first. We are now into an extended lockdown compared to what we had first planned for. And as a result, we owe our small businesses this relief, and I am in fully support of it. And kudos to the Minister and her team. Thank you.
Thank you. Member for Great Slave. Did the Minister want to respond, or you're good with that?
I'll take the positives out of that, Madam Chair, and leave it there. Thank you.
Member for Hay River South.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I too am in support of this reduction. It's time that we start to recognize the importance of small business. I know that there was an attempt in the last Assembly to try and lower get the tax rate down to 0, and the government at the time did not even give it time to hit the floor for debate. So I'm very pleased to see that we have a group here that understands the importance of small businesses and is willing to give them support in whatever way they can, and this is one small way to do it. Just as taxes are required for civilization, so is small business required to keep people working and to move ahead, move the economy ahead, and grow. So again, I just want to say that I'm in full support of this bill. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Member. Minister, did you have any comments? No?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any further questions or comments to general comments? Nope. Okay. Since there's no further general comments, we can proceed to the clause-by-clause review of the bill. Committee, we will defer the bill number and title until after consideration of the clauses. Please turn to page 1 of the bill. Clause 1, does committee agree? Agreed. Clause 2, does committee agree? Clause 3, does committee agree? Clause 4, does committee agree? Please turn to page 2 of the bill. Clause 5, does committee agree? Committee, to the bill as a whole, does committee agree that Bill 16, an act to amend the Income Tax Act, is now ready for third reading? Thank you, committee. Bill 16, an act to amend the Income Tax Act, is now ready for third reading. Does committee agree that this concludes our consideration of Bill 16, an act to amend the Income Tax Act? Thank you, Minister, and thank you to our witnesses. Sergeant-at-Arms, please escort the witnesses from the chamber. Committee, we've agreed to consider Committee Report 10-19-2, Report on Bill 3, an act to amend the Public Highways Act. I will go to the Chair of the Standing Committee on Economic Development and Environment for any opening comments. Member for Nunukput.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. Again, Bill 3 had a second reading, and the House was referred to Standing Committee on Environment and Economic Development on June 23rd, 2020, on August 25th, 2020, and October 15, 2020. Committee's review of the bill was extended. On August 19th, 2020, the committee invited comments and proposed amendments from the communities across the Northwest Territories, Indigenous governments and businesses involved in the use of the construction of roads. The committee received written submission from the City of Yellowknife. The committee held a public hearing on Bill 3 on October 14, 2020. It concluded its review of the bill, which is a public clause-by-clause review, February 10th, 2021. The committee passed 4 motions, motions to amend Bill 3, all of which received concurrence with the minister. And thank you, Madam Chair. Individual members may have additional comments or questions to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Nunukput. I will now open the floor to general comments on Committee Report 10-19-2, Report on Bill 3, an act to amend the Public Highways Act. Do members have any general comments? Member for Frame Lake.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Yeah, I just would like to thank my colleagues that serve on the committee and the City of Yellowknife that made a written submission. You know, this was an interesting issue that we had to deal with. I guess N.W.T was worried about incurring liability for winter roads that were being built off of our roads. And that's what, you know, we were told that this was an easy fix. And we started to deal with this actually in the last assembly, but we didn't get to it, so it came back again into this assembly. And although I thought it was supposed to be an easy fix, that's not the kind of bill we actually ended up with. We ended up with a bill that was actually going to absolve N.W.T of any liability whatsoever for almost any highway, which was overkill in my view. And so it took a lot of effort on the part of the committee to work with the minister to try to change the way the bill read so that there was a more even balance of the rights of the government to try to protect itself from liability, but the rights of drivers to actually sue N.W.T if highways are not maintained to certain standards. So it took a long time to work with the minister on this. That's why we had to get the extension, but I think we arrived at a good place. I also recognize that the minister did commit to post a manual on the infrastructure website that laid out and made more explicit and public standards for care and maintenance of our highways, so that information is now public. All of this to say, Madam Chair, that the committee had to work very hard on what I thought was an easy issue, but we did fix a bill that needed a lot of work, and I want to thank the minister for working with us to get it right. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Member, are there any other general comments? All right. Thank you. Committee, do you agree that you have concluded consideration of Committee Report 10-19-2, Report on Bill 3, an Act to amend the Public Highways Act? Thank you, Committee. We have concluded consideration of Committee Report 10-19-2, Report on Bill 3, an Act to amend the Public Highways Act. Committee, we've agreed to consider Bill 3, an Act to amend the Public Highways Act. I will ask the Minister of Infrastructure to introduce the bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I'm here to present Bill 3, an Act to amend the Public Highways Act. The Public Highways Act is administered by the Department of Infrastructure and governs, among other things, the construction, maintenance, access to, and use of highways within the Northwest Territories. This bill will amend the Public Highways Act to address the Government of the Northwest Territories' liability for loss or damage resulting from a failure to maintain primary highways in the Northwest Territories. This bill requires the Minister to maintain primary highways and provides that the N.W.T is liable, with exceptions, for loss or damage resulting from a failure to do so. This bill will make it clear that the minister has no duty to maintain roads that are not designated as primary highway under the Public Highways Act. During Standing Committee on Economic Development and Environment Review, recommendations were put forward and accepted which improve clarity that the N.W.T is liable for a failure to maintain and address minor drafting issues. I would be pleased to answer any questions members may have. Kuya Naini.
Thank you, Minister. I will now turn to the Chair of Standing Committee on Economic Development and Environment, the committee that considered the bill, for opening comments.
Thank you, Madam.
Member for N.W.T.
Madam Chair, no, having introduced Committee Report 10-19(2) earlier today, I have no additional comments to the bill at this time. I'd just like to thank committee for all the hard work that they've done and my committee staff and their efforts in reviewing this piece of legislation. And individual members may have additional comments as well. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Member. Minister, would you like to bring witnesses into the chamber?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Sergeant at Arms, please escort the witnesses into the chamber. Minister, will you please introduce your witnesses?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I'm joined by witnesses Steve Ludit, Deputy Minister for Department of Infrastructure, as well as Jacques Reberge, Senior Legislative Advisor with Department of Infrastructure. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Minister. I will now open the floor to general comments on Bill 3. Are there any general comments? Seeing that there are no further general comments, can we proceed to a clause-by-clause review of the bill? Committee, we will defer the bill number and title until after consideration of the clauses. Please turn to page 1 of the bill. Clause 1, does committee agree? Clause 2, does committee agree? Committee, to the bill as a whole, does committee agree that Bill 3, an act to amend the Public Highways Act, is now ready for third reading? Thank you, committee. Bill 3, an act to amend the Public Highways Act, is now ready for third reading. Does committee agree that this concludes our consideration of Bill 3, an act to amend the Public Highways Act? Thank you, Minister, and thank you to our witnesses. Sergeant at Arms, you may escort the witnesses from the chamber. Committee, we have agreed to consider Bill 12, an act to amend the Apprenticeship, Trade, and Occupation Certification Act. I will ask the Minister of Education, Culture, and Employment to introduce the bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm here today to present Bill 12, an act to amend the Apprenticeship, Trade, and Occupational Certification Act. I want to thank the Standing Committee on Social Development for its interest and review in the bill. The Apprenticeship, Trade, and Occupational Certification Act gives the Minister authority to issue various types of certifications for apprenticeships, trades, and occupations in the N.W.T. This bill seeks to amend the Act to allow for the issuance of other prescribed certificates, to give the Department of Education, Culture, and Employment the ability to issue certificates of achievement in business competency to N.W.T. journey persons, commonly known as Blue Seal Certificate. Blue Seal certificates, which are issued in a number of other jurisdictions, formally recognize achievement in business competency when a journey person has completed recognized business courses and training. There is currently no mechanism for granting Blue Seal certificates under the Act. Having a Blue Seal certificate program in the N.W.T. that formally recognizes the achievements of journey persons in business competency would both support the growth of businesses and the continued professional development of journey persons. The amendment would also keep the N.W.T aligned with other jurisdictions where Blue Seal certificates or similar certificates are issued and encourage associated business, education, and training in the North. I am pleased to bring forward these amendments that will have a positive impact on our residents and the N.W.T labor market. This concludes my opening remarks, and I would be pleased to answer any questions that the members may have regarding Bill 12. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I will now turn to the Chair of the Standing Committee on Social Development, the committee that considered the bill, for opening comments. Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, Bill 12, an act to amend the Apprenticeship Trade and Occupation Certification Act, received second reading in the Legislative Assembly on October 29, 2020, and was referred to the Standing Committee on Social Development for review. On February 10, 2021, the Standing Committee held a public hearing with the Minister of Education, Culture and Employment and completed its clause-by-clause review of the bill. I thank the committee and committee staff for their efforts in reviewing this legislation. Individual members may have additional comments or questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Minister, would you like to bring witnesses into the chamber?
Yes, please.
Sergeant-at-Arms, please escort the witnesses into the chamber. Minister, please introduce your witnesses.
Thank you. We have Mr. Michael Saturnino, Assistant Deputy Minister, Labour and Income Security, and Mr. Mike Reddy, Director of Legislation, Department of Justice. Thank you.
Thank you and welcome. I will now open the floor to general comments on Bill 12. Are there any general comments? Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm happy to see this. I know that a number of jurisdictions do that, and there's more and more Blue Seal kind of courses popping up at colleges across the country. I'm just wondering kind of the impetus for this. Do we plan on giving out any Blue Seals? Is there presently people waiting to be able to get certified for one of these? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Minister, sorry.
Thank you. I think my dad's waiting. But there's criteria that needs to be developed. There's a lot of different things that have to happen, but I can ask Mr. Saturnino for some clarification. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Saturnino.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's definitely been some interest expressed from different journey persons across the Northwest Territories. And so, you know, we don't exactly have statistics on how many we intend to see in the first year or in the first few years, but there has been interest in it and a commitment from across a few different jurisdictions to try and harmonize and bring a Blue Seal to most provinces and territories. So our plan is to do so, and then we'll of course promote it and communicate it, and hopefully we'll get a big uptake for the program. Thank you.
Thank you. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, looking forward to seeing this, build this, promote this, and hopefully we can get a few of our red seals to also get Blue Seals. I'm just wondering if there's any plans for Aurora College to, provide the training required for a Blue Seal.
Thank you. Minister.
Thank you. So if you look at other jurisdictions, what they do there are a number of different courses that you can take, and then that's confirmed by the department, and then you get issued a Blue Seal, and I'm sure that Aurora College has those courses. I don't have a list with me, but as a polytechnic, they would definitely have those types of courses. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other member for Hay River South?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I'm waiting to get my Blue Seal. I guess I think it's a good thing because tradespeople, whether they know it or not, and I think most of them know it, they're business people, and I think having that extra certification and the ability to own and run their own business and maintain that, I think it's very important. So it's a good change, and I guess the one question I would have is that, if you've got people who are tradespeople but also have a degree in business, would they be allowed to challenge the exam, or would they be grandfathered in? Or thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Minister?
Thank you. Perhaps I can ask Mr. Saturnino to discuss, how exactly this would roll out and what types of courses and, when those courses would have had to been taken, if it's looking in the past or future looking, and that should give members an idea of what this would look like rolling out. Thank you.
Thank you. Minister, Mr. Saturnino.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The way Blue Seal programs are typically set up are that there's typically a set of courses that are deemed to be required, and they're usually, of course, business-related courses. With regards to the program, I don't know, there wouldn't necessarily be an exam similar to a Red Seal, more as meeting the requirements, so the required courses. And the plan typically with most of the Blue Seal programs is that you can go back and look at courses you've already taken. That's standard for most post-secondary institutions, as well as the trades, is typically looking back 10 years, but that's something that we need to establish as we develop the program further. Thank you.
Thank you. Member?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, that clarifies it. I guess I've got to take the courses. Thank you.
Thank you. And is there any member for Great Slave?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, my colleague just made me think a little bit of a question there then. Will there be the ability to take this program over a period of time? So I'm assuming, of course, it wouldn't be you have to do it all in 1 year or anything, but how long of a period of time will people get? Can they do this sort of as a part-time thing, take a course a year and eventually over time work towards it, or are they going to be restricted to having to do it in a quicker time frame? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Minister?
Thank you, and I don't think we're there yet in the development, given that the legislation is just before us now. But if you look at other jurisdictions, it's sometimes it's a program, sometimes it's a combination of courses, and that doesn't appear, from what I've seen, to be a strict time frame. And as Mr. Saturnino said, if you can look back 10 years, then perhaps we could see what was taken in those 10 years. So I think there's some flexibility, and as with everything that we do here, we can adapt it to the realities of the North as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Great Slave?
Thank you. I do appreciate hearing the minister say that. I worry sometimes as we go towards like certifications and regulatory type things, which we do need, but there's often a reason why they don't get developed in the North specifically, because it's just we can't support sometimes creating more red tape. So just more of a comment, but really glad to hear that. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'll take that as a comment. Are there any further general comments? Does committee agree that there are no further general comments? Can we proceed to the clause-by-clause review of the bill? Committee, we will defer the bill number and title until after consideration of the clauses. Please turn to page 1 of the bill. Does committee, clause 1, does committee agree? Clause 2, does committee agree? Clause 3, does committee agree? Clause 4, does committee agree? Committee, to the bill as a whole, does committee agree that Bill 12, an act to amend the Apprenticeship, Trade, and Occupation Certification Act is now ready for third reading? Thank you, committee. Bill 12, an act to amend the Apprenticeship, Trade, and Occupation Certification Act is now ready for third reading. Does committee agree that this concludes our consideration of Bill 12, an act to amend the Apprenticeship, Trade, and Occupation Certification Act? Thank you, Minister, and thank you to our witnesses. Sergeant-at-Arms, please escort the witnesses from the chamber. committee, we've agreed to consider Bill 13, an act to amend the Interpretation Act. I will ask the Minister of Justice to introduce the bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I'm here today to present Bill 13, an act to amend the Interpretation Act. I'd like to thank the Standing Committee on Social Development for their thorough review of this bill. A motion was made in committee to ensure there's an opportunity for public engagement prior to this bill coming into force, and I believe this bill has improved as a result. Bill 13 will amend the Interpretation Act to allow for the elimination of seasonal time changes in favor of a permanent, year-round time standard. Specifically, the bill establishes a permanent time standard and prescribes that the Commissioner and Executive Council set this out in regulations that will replace the current daylight saving time regulations. The proposed amendment will be brought into force by order of the Commissioner at a future date. This means that after the bill receives assent, biannual time changes will continue to be observed until an order is made to make the change to a permanent time standard. This change was prompted by previously voiced public support, research findings that permanent time is healthier and safer, as well as a growing trend in which Canadian and international jurisdictions are eliminating seasonal time changes in favor of a permanent time standard. This amendment will position the N.W.T to be able to move expeditiously to a permanent time standard as this issue continues to evolve across Canadian jurisdictions. This concludes my opening remarks, and I would be pleased to answer any questions that members may have regarding Bill 13.
Thank you, Minister. I will now turn to the Chair of Standing Committee on Social Development, the committee that considered the bill, for opening comments. Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, Bill 13, an act to amend the Interpretation Act, received second reading in the Legislative Assembly on October 29, 2020, and was referred to the Standing Committee on Social Development for review. On February 9, 2021, the Standing Committee held a public hearing with the Minister of Justice and completed its clause-by-clause review of the bill. Committee passed one motion with concurrence from the Minister of Justice. I thank the committee and committee staff for their efforts in reviewing this legislation. Individual members may have additional comments or questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Minister, would you like to bring witnesses into the chamber?
Yes, if there's a witness in that room, I'd like to bring them into the chamber.
Thank you, Sergeant at Arms. Please escort the witness into the chamber. He's there. Minister, would you please introduce your witness?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to welcome back Mr. Mike Reddy, Director of Legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome back. I will now open the floor to general comments on Bill 13. Member for Frame Lake.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to say that in the last Assembly, there was a petition on changing the time. And there was some support for it. I don't think it was overwhelming, but the whole matter was referred to the Standing Committee on Social Development in the last Assembly, and they did some work on this issue. But at the end of the day, their recommendation was that we keep ourselves on daylight savings time so that we would be in sync with Alberta. So the bill, though, that we got from Cabinet did not really do that. It gave Cabinet a blank check to change time zones, get rid of daylight savings time without bothering to talk to anybody. And quite frankly, I wasn't prepared to give Cabinet a blank check like that. So, I want to thank the committee for the amendment that was made to the bill. Look, I love my colleagues opposite me, but I don't give them a blank check for anything. So, so in any event, I want to thank the committee for bringing forward an amendment. I know I sat in on their discussion about it, and I suggested that there be an amendment to try to circumscribe that ability to change things, and I can accept what's here. And the work that the committee did on this issue. But I do, I guess 5.2, the way this reads now, it says that there be an opportunity for public engagement with residents regarding the elimination of the time change and setting of standard time. what does that really mean? And, you know, the importance of this kind of discussion and debate is that if this ever goes for interpretation somewhere, the courts are going to look back at what we say in this House right now. So I want to get on the record, what does the minister mean when he says public engagement before a time change is going to be made? Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Member. Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just to be clear, I wouldn't change the time all willy-nilly with this blank check, as the member calls it. So, you know, it's not like I want to leave work early. I'm going to change the time, so now it's time to go home. The only prudent thing to do really is to ensure that we are aligned with Alberta. That being said, there is a requirement in this bill for some sort of a public consultation. I envision that as an email address that the public can send their concerns to. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Member?
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'm sure the minister is being rather facetious, but no, seriously, I want to know what kind of public engagement Cabinet would intend to do before making such a change. You know, are you going to give people a reasonable amount of notice, 30, 60 days? Are you going to publish it in the proposed change in newspapers, on a website somewhere, allow for comments to be submitted? Will there be a summary of those comments and then some reasons for why the change is going to be made or not? That's a kind of a reasonable approach that I would expect. So, you know, let's cut the humor here and let's get serious, and I'd like to get a serious answer from the minister about what's really meant here by public engagement. Because the courts will look back at this, and, you know, when residents in the future, they may want to know what was meant by public engagement. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Member. Minister.
Thank you. So this was something put forward by committee, and so in my mind, it's something quite limited, given that it would make very little sense for us to go off on our own and have a different time than Alberta. It wouldn't make sense, and I don't think the public would be appreciative if we did that. It would cause havoc for flights. It would cause havoc for all sorts of things. I'm serious that we would have some sort of a website, an email address, a place where comments could be submitted. I don't plan to travel around the territory seeking engagement. Of course, there's going to be advertisements. That's something completely different from engagement. There's going to be notice given. There's going to be extensive notice given. Everyone's going to know that the time is changing. It's going to be the talk of the town, and I can promise that. But there won't be the type of widespread engagement that there might be like on a large piece of legislation or something like that. This is just not where I think that our resources need to go. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Member?
Yeah, thanks. I think that was a little more helpful. But look, I'm not suggesting that there has to be public hearings and all of that, but I would expect that, the actual time change, yes, there would obviously be notice, but that there would be notice of, or at least an opportunity for the public to express their views about whether we should change to daylight savings times or be consistent with Alberta, if they make that change, that kind of thing. I'm not expecting a big roadshow, but to say that there's just going to be an email address, I don't think that quite cuts it in terms of public engagement. I'm not sure what else I have to say in this topic right now, Madam Chair, but I do hope that the Minister would take this kind of responsibility seriously. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Member. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I understand why we want to have this legislation in place in order to be more flexible and quick to adapt should Alberta decide to make their change. But now I guess listening to the Minister, I'm a little bit confused when we do talk about engagement, and I get that there's different levels of engagement and what that means, but and not that I necessarily think the scenario will occur, but what happens if we or the engagement shows the Minister that there's not a want to change how things are, and then Alberta does change, and all of a sudden we're now sitting here out of sync with Alberta. So I guess my question is, is the intention that as soon as Alberta changes, we will too? So we will be making our decision based on Alberta's decision. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Member. Minister?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And there's a significant amount of research about the effects of daylight savings time. There's anecdotal evidence about daylight savings time. I don't know if I've ever heard anyone here say they like it.
I like it. It takes an hour of my birthday.
And so, barring some, barring some just evidence that I can't foresee coming forward, I expect that we would be in sync with Alberta. And the reason that the legislation is as it is because we want to be able to be very nimble and not make the change, anticipating that Alberta will make a change, and then Alberta doesn't make a change. And that scenario has happened in other jurisdictions before, and we don't want that to happen. And if there's public consultation and they say they want to change before Alberta changes, then perhaps that's something that we can look at as well. But I can't imagine that we would be too far off of our neighbors to the south. Thank you.
Thank you. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, and I do appreciate that. I am just sort of trying to raise a scenario that needs to be considered. However, I'm in favor of getting rid of it. But I understand why we need to be in line with Alberta as someone who's always worked in small satellite offices where generally I'm linked to the Edmonton office. I couldn't imagine being an hour out, which would then basically just mean I end up working an extra hour every day because I'd have to make myself available earlier for them or later. I do want to urge the minister that, and I'm sure they are, but I just would be remiss if I didn't bring it up. There is a school of thought about which way to go with the time change as far as what's healthier for us as Canadians with our lack of sunlight. So just wanted to make sure that got on the record somewhere that be considered, because I believe there was one jurisdiction that actually was looking at doing it the opposite way from which healthcare professionals were recommending. So do want to make that statement. And yeah, I do support that, just wanting to make sure that the minister is looking at all the angles. Thanks.
Thank you. Member, did you have any comments?
And I think that for those of us who reside in the southern part of the territory, this is a more live debate than maybe some of our northern colleagues where it's either always dark or it's always sunny. But I take the members' comments. I take all the comments here seriously, and I do appreciate the feedback that we're getting, and that's why we have these debates. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Tabacca.
Madam Chair, I guess I'm just wondering why we're dealing with this issue when we don't even know if Alberta is going to be aligning with us. Because I'm sure that until they align with us, I mean, why are we doing this? Why are we even putting this on the books? Like, I don't understand the priorities, but it certainly ain't my priority. And the engagement part is really important, and engagement is face-to-face, because a lot of people probably would not be in favor of something like this if Alberta is not on the same page as we are. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Minister?
Thank you, and if Alberta's not on the same page as us, I wouldn't be in favor of it either. The reason we're doing this now is because we don't want to be in a scenario where we're told in the middle of summer that Alberta is getting rid of their daylight savings times, and we don't have the ability to be responsive. And now we're out of sync for however long it takes to get a legislative proposal together, send it to the committee, get it back from the committee, draft legislation, bring it to the House, give the committee 120 days to look at it, bring it back to a sitting, and then go from there. So we could be months and months, we could be 6 months behind, and it seems needless. It's a relatively low effort bill to draft. I'm not demeaning what Mr. Reddy has done. He's a miracle worker, but I think that it didn't take a lot of resources, and it'll save us a lot in the long run. Thank you.
Thank you. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Does the minister happen to know what the #1 sick day in the N.W.T is?
Thank you. Minister.
Thank you. The #1 sick day is spring ahead, so daylight savings. It costs, I'm not sure if I have the estimates of how much that costs the government on an annual basis, but we do see a significant cost to the N.W.T. Thank you.
Thank you. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that reason alone is to get rid of the time change. It's also one of the most common sick days in the private sector, costing private businesses millions of dollars every year. When Alberta went out, 93% of Albertans wanted to get rid of it. BC, 90%. Almost every jurisdiction, it's been well over 75% to 90% of Canadians want to get rid of time change. Yukon went and did it. They went to permanent daylight savings time. The Alberta government is ready to go. They're going to get rid of it. So can we just do this already? Is the minister willing to get rid of time change and adopt a permanent daylight savings time? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Member Minister.
Thank you. So if this bill passes, then there needs to be a period of public engagement. And then we can move on with doing that work. Thank you. But I'm anxious. I'm looking forward for Alberta to do it so that we can do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I recognize that's the debate here is whether to do it if Alberta doesn't. I am of the view that we could do what the Yukon did and just do it anyways, and I think permanent daylight savings times is the way to go, not permanent standard time. Can I just confirmation that the wording of this bill is slightly confusing to me, and I do believe this is the case, but we're scrapping the daylight savings regulations to create one standard time, but that standard time still could be daylight savings time year-round if we wanted. Is that correct?
Thank you, Member Minister.
Yes.
Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess, does the minister have any insight where Alberta is with that? I know they went out for consultation. Actually, I believe they actually had a bill ready at one point, and then COVID came. But do we have any update on where Alberta is with this change? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Member Minister.
Thank you. And unfortunately, no, I don't. But I can let the member know that we'll be ready. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Member.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess regardless of, I think if Alberta does this, we have to follow suit, but is the minister willing to go out and get some public engagement before about the support for this? I suspect if we do poll the people in the N.W.T, there will be overwhelming support, as has been the case in every other Canadian jurisdiction who's done this work. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Member Minister.
Thank you. I've already talked to the department about getting a website and an email address going so that the members of the public can provide their comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Are there any further general comments? Member for Hay River South.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I guess I'm pleased to see this bill, and we're not Alberta, and maybe they're waiting for us to make the first move. So I'm pleased to see that there's engagement out there, and if it looks like that we have to pull the trigger on it, then we do it, and then they'll probably follow right behind us. So I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you. I made some gambles today, but I don't know if I'm willing to make that kind of a gamble. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Minister. Are there any further general comments to Bill 13? Seeing none, we can proceed to the clause-by-clause review of the bill. Committee, we will defer the bill number and title until after consideration of the clauses. Please turn to page 1 of the bill. Clause 1, does committee agree? Clause 2, does committee agree? Clause 3, does committee agree? Clause 4, does committee agree? Clause 5, does committee agree? Committee, to the bill as a whole, does committee agree that Bill 13, an act to amend the Interpretation Act, is now ready for third reading? Thank you, committee. Bill 13, an act to amend the Interpretation Act, is now ready for third reading. Does committee agree that this concludes our consideration of Bill 13, an act to amend the Interpretation Act? Thank you, Minister, and thank you to our witnesses.
Committee, we've agreed to consider Bill 14, an act to amend the Securities Act. I will ask the Minister of Justice to introduce the bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm here today to present Bill 14, an act to amend the Securities Act. I'd like to thank the Standing Committee on Social Development for their thorough review of this bill. The purpose of securities legislation is to facilitate the raising of capital in the private sector while providing appropriate protections and remedies for investors. As cross-border trading has evolved over time, the regulation of securities in Canada has become a coordinated activity among all provinces and territories, and increasingly worldwide. When the Northwest Territories enacted securities legislation in 2008, it was in line with the coordinated system of regulation across Canada. Since that time, however, the provinces and territories have agreed that regulatory improvements are required due to proposed changes to European Union regulations, which come into force on January 1st, 2022. This bill addresses those issues so Canadian benchmark administrators who provide information necessary for the functioning of global capital markets can be formally designated in Canada and thus continue to operate in the European Union. The proposed amendments ensure securities legislation remains harmonized across jurisdictions, directs compliance to the rules established, and protects members of the public who are investors by ensuring the integrity of the system. This concludes my opening remarks, and I'd be pleased to answer any questions that members may have regarding Bill 14.
Thank you, Minister. I will now turn to the Chair of the Standing Committee on Social Development, the committee that considered the bill for opening remarks. Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, Bill 14, an act to amend the Securities Act, received second reading in the Legislative Assembly on October 29, 2020, and was referred to the Standing Committee on Social Development for review. On February 11, 2021, the Standing Committee held a public hearing with the Minister of Justice and completed its clause-by-clause review of the bill. I want to thank committee and committee staff for their efforts in reviewing this legislation. Individual members may have additional comments or questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Member. Minister, would you like to bring witnesses into the chamber?
Yes, I would.
Thank you. Sergeant-at-Arms, please escort the witness into the chamber. Minister, would you please introduce your witnesses?
Thank you. I'd like to introduce Matthew Yap, Superintendent of Securities, and Sherry Giroux, Legislative Counsel, and they would be happy to answer any questions members may have about this topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I will now open the floor to general comments on Bill 14. Does the committee agree that there are no further general comments? We can proceed to clause-by-clause review of the bill. Committee, we will defer the bill number and title until after consideration of the clauses. Please turn to page 1 of the bill. Clause 1. Does committee agree? Clause 2. Does committee agree? Please turn to page 2 of the bill. Clause 3. Does committee agree? Clause 4. Does committee agree? Please turn to page 3 of the bill. Clause 5, does committee agree? Please turn to page 5 of the bill. Clause 6, does committee agree? Clause 7, does committee agree? Please turn to page 9 of the bill. Clause 8, does committee agree? Committee, to the bill as a whole, does committee agree that Bill 14, an act to amend the Securities Act, is now ready for third reading? Agreed. Thank you, committee. Bill 14, an act to amend the Securities Act, is now ready for third reading. Does committee agree that this concludes consideration of Bill 14, an act to amend the Securities Act? Agreed. Thank you, Minister, and thank you to our witnesses. Sergeant-at-Arms, you may escort the witnesses from the chamber. Committee, we've agreed to consider table document 165-19-2, Government of the Northwest Territories Response to Committee Report 1-19-2, Report on the Long-Term Post-Pandemic Recovery Recommendations to the N.W.T. I will now open the floor to general comments on the table document 166-19-2. Are there any general comments? Seeing no comments, thank you, committee. Do you agree that you've concluded consideration of table document 165-19-2, Government of the Northwest Territories Response to Committee Report 1-19-2, Report on Long-Term Post-Pandemic Recovery Recommendations to the GNWT? Thank you, committee. We have concluded consideration of table document 165-19-2. Committee, we've agreed to consider table document 166-19-2, Government of the Northwest Territories Response to Committee Report 2-19-2, Report on the Long-Term Post-Pandemic Recovery Recommendations to the N.W.T. I will now open the floor to general comments on the table document 166-19-2. Seeing that there are no comments, thank you, committee. Do you agree that you have concluded consideration of table document 166-19-2, Government of the Northwest Territories Response to the Committee Report 2-19-2, Report on Long-Term Post-Pandemic Recovery Recommendations to the GNWT? Thank you, committee. We have concluded consideration of table document 166-19-2. Committee, we have agreed to consider table document 167-19-2, Government of the Northwest Territories Response to Committee Report 3-19-2, Report on the Long-Term Post-Pandemic Recovery Recommendations to the GNWT. I will now open the floor to general comments on the table document 167-19-2. Seeing that there are no comments, thank you, committee. Do you agree that you have concluded consideration of table document 167-19-2, Government of the Northwest Territories Response to Committee Report 3-19-2, Report on Long-Term Post-Pandemic Recovery Recommendations to the GNWT? Thank you, committee. We have concluded consideration of table document 167-19-2. Committee, we have agreed to consider Minister Statement 77-19-2, National Housing Co-Investment Fund. I will now open the floor to general comments on Minister Statement 77-19-2. Seeing that there are no comments, thank you to committee. Do you agree that you have concluded consideration of Minister Statement 77-19-2, National Housing Co-Investment Fund? Thank you, committee. We have concluded consideration of Minister Statement 77-19-2. What is the wish of committee? Mr. Norn?
Madam Chair, I move that the chair rise and report progress.
Thank you. Motion is in order, non-debatable. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion is carried. I will now rise and report progress.
May I please have the report of Committee of the Whole, please. Member for Medevac-Twin Lakes.
Mr. Speaker, your committee has been considering Bill 3, 12, 13, 14, and 16. Table document 165, 166, 167-19-2, and Minister Statement 77-19-2, and would like to report progress. And Mr. Speaker, I move that the report of the Committee of the Whole be concurred with. Thank you.
For Medevac-Twin Lakes, do we have a seconder? Member for Great Slave. All those in favor? All those opposed? The motion is carried. Third reading of bills. Third reading of bills. Mr. Clerk, orders of the day.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk, or Mr. Speaker. Orders of the day for Friday, March 12, 10 a.m. Prayer, Minister Statements, Member Statements, returns to oral questions 638, oral question 654. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Acknowledgements, oral questions, returns to written questions, replies to Commissioner's address. Petitions, reports of committees on the review of bills, reports of standing and special committees, tabling of documents, notices of motion, motions, notices of motion for first reading of bills, second reading of bills, consideration in Committee of the Whole of bills and other matters. Bill 20, Committee Reports 8, 9, and 12, Table Document 286, Table Document 349, Table Document 349, Report of Committee of the Whole, third reading of bills, Bills 3, 12, 13, 14, and 16. Orders of the day.
This House stands adjourned until Friday, March 12, 2021 at 10 a.m. sharp.